Okay, so the next thing that I'll do is I said click animation. What I should have done is, first of all, let's include some items into our sprite and also our screen rather, and also into our game view. So the first thing that I'll do is I'll just simply take the grass thin sprite. Let me just go ahead and drag that into my scene area, and I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to have a couple of these. So first of all, let me scale this by clicking over here, this scale option. And let's make this just a little bit smaller. As you can see here, I'm clicking over here. Or I could also drag and drop any of these scale options, but not this one because it only elongates the x-axis. Let me undo. This one elongates the y-axis. Let me undo. But this one at the center is going to proportionally change both of them. So I'll change it to something like this. Now let me go ahead and reposition it, dragging it down to something like this. Say, for example, I'm looking at what it would look like in the game view. And then what I'll do is I'm going to move this over just so that it's off screen. In fact, let me use my mouse wheel to make sure that this goes off screen about halfway, something like that. And then I'm going to copy and paste this, or just duplicate it. And then I'll move it over. Now, I want to make sure that I move it over an appropriate amount, so that's not good because there's a little bit of space here, as you can see. So I do want to make sure that I move it over appropriately. So let me just go ahead and zoom in and bring it in a little bit closer. And then I can zoom in some more. I'm holding down I'm using the alternate key to move this thing around, hold it down, and then I can use the mouse wheel to scroll in, scroll out. And again, I'm just going to make sure it's really, really close right there. It looks like it's connected. Okay, no seams. So then I can go ahead and take these away. And let me go ahead and duplicate one more time. And once again, I'm going to zoom in. And see if I can move it over just a little bit. Right there, it looks like it's connected. And then finally, one more of these. So duplicate, and let's see if we get it really tight here. All right, and so then I'll just simply move this over until that seam goes away right there. Perfect, okay. And if you wanted to center all of these, you could do that. So we'll just simply select this one. I'm going to hold Shift, select this one, and this one. Or I could have selected them over here as follows. Hold down Shift, select all of them. And then just simply move it to the left or to the right, so that I have a little bit of spillway over here and I have a little bit of spillway over here. And you're going to see later on in a future video lesson why I'm doing that. Okay, so that takes care of the ground. I think we should also have the sky background as well. So let me go ahead and drag that into the frame, into the scene view, I should say. And let's go ahead and position that. Now, you'll notice that the sky, since I'm moved that into the scene view as a secondary object, it will it'll ride on top of, or it'll be layered on top of the ground. So I don't want that. I want all the ground to be up front, and then I want the sky to be in the background. So let me just deliberately overlap them so you can see what it looks like over here. And with the sky, you'll see that I have a sorting layer, right? And I also have order in layer. What happens if I type in the number 1? Okay, if I type in the number 1, no big deal. But over here for the grass, if I type in the number, actually let me go back over here for the sky and return that to order 0, and then for this ground I'll say the number 1. Then you'll see what happens. The 0 indicates the layer that's furthest behind, and then every additional number order is going to be in front of. So if I change all of these guys to 1, as you see here, so now the sky is going to be behind the ground. Okay, so let me select the sky, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that this thing is just right here on the left edge, and then I'm going to duplicate it, and then I'm going to move that duplication over just a little bit, and something like that. There we go. I've just gotten rid of that. And that's okay right there, because my intention again is to repeat this pattern over and over again. I think what I will do though is I don't like this little piece of the ground is not completely covering this, so what we'll do is I'll just simply take that last piece and I'll just simply stretch the ground a little bit so that it makes the same, so that it is the same length as the two sky images. Okay, that looks pretty good. And I think what I'll do is I will create an empty object, and the name of that empty object is simply going to be background. Get rid of the words game object. And then I'm going to make these guys children of the background. So that way it reduces any clutter that I have over here in the hierarchy panel. The background is referring to this entire thing. All right. So now that the background is finished, let's go ahead and place a character into the background. Oh, by the way, here's another thing I also have to take into consideration. I was thinking about when the character is placed on our game view, and then when I run the program or when I run the game, the character is just going to fall right through. So I know in the future I'm going to have to place a box collider on this ground. But until then, let's just simply go with the program and discover our errors as we continue on, so I can show you how to make adjustments. Okay, so the first thing that I'll do is if I go over here into the idle sprite, if I take this one character right here and if I drag him onto the screen, well, first of all, I can't see him because he's behind the background. So what I'll do is I'll change this ordering layer to 2. Now there he is. And he's a little bit too big for the scene. So I'm just going to go over here to this scaling tool, hover my mouse pointer right here and reduce him in size. That looks pretty good. And let me go ahead and position him. That looks okay, I guess, right there. See, what I intend on doing later on is I'm going to put a platform right here that he'll jump up onto the platform. So I don't want to make him too small, don't want to make him too big. I'm going to have him here on purpose on top of the ground, so that when we start the game, he's going to fall down and then land on the ground. So let's see what happens right now when I run my program. Okay, so it doesn't look like anything exciting is happening. I mean, it is running the game in game mode. He's just up there. He doesn't have a rigid body, that's why he's not falling, and he doesn't look like he's animating. Okay, well, let's take care of the animation part first. Now, when I go over here to animation, because I have my character selected, he says, okay, to begin animation, idle 0000, create an animator and an animation clip. Sure, we want to create an animator and an animation clip. By the way, if you don't have animator here, then just simply go to Window, and then you'll see animator. You'll click on that, and then you'll get this animator tab. And again, it may not be docked, so you just simply move it into this location right here, so it's docked. Okay, so for animation, yes, I would like to create an animation. Now, what am I going to call this animation, and where am I going to play it? Or where am I going to keep it, I should say. Well, right now, everything is being stored in sprites and in assets. So I think what I'll do is this. I'll just simply click on assets, and I'm going to create a new folder. And the new folder is animations. Then in animations, I want to create the idle animation. So I'll type in idle here. Okay, so there's my animations folder, and here we are. And what we have to do at this point is drag in all of the individual idle images, all the idle PNGs. So what I'll do is I'll select this guy. I'll select, hold down Shift on your keyboard, and I'll select this last guy, which is idle 9. And then I'll drag and drop this anywhere into this animation area. All right, so if I play it, you can see what it looks like. He's jumping around pretty fast there. Now, that's too fast. So let me stop the play. Let's change this to 30 and then run the animation. Well, that's a little bit better, but I still think that's too fast. Actually, it's still at 60. Let me type in 15 and then press Enter. Okay, now that's too slow. That's too slow. So let's try 30 and then Enter, and then I'll play. That's better. Okay, so this way the gamer knows that something is happening. The player is in this idle mode, and just sitting there waiting for something to happen. Okay, so you have to adjust whatever sample speed you want, and so for me 30 frames a second is good. And let me see, if I go over here to animator, if I select the character, you'll see this. Now we're going to talk a little bit more about the animator, so right now I'm just going to leave this as is. We're going to talk about how we can go from one state to the next state, but again, we'll leave this as is. Okay, so that is the idle state, and I want him to have a rigid body. So what we'll do is go back over here, and I'm going to select my character. By the way, this really shouldn't say idle. I really should just call him character or player. So we'll call him character. Press enter. Okay, so this is my character. Now I want that character to have a rigid body. So we're going to go over here and click Add Component, 2D Physics, and then Rigid Body. And the reason why I want him to have a rigid body is because I want him to be affected by gravity. I want gravity to pull down on him. He lands on the ground. Also in the future, when I jump up into the air, I want him to be pulled right back down into the ground. So now that he has a rigid body, let me run the program or go into game mode and let's see what happens. Okay, so he is falling. That's good news. And of course, the problem is that he is falling through and there's nothing to collide with. So here's what I need to do. I need to set up a box collider with the ground to make sure that when he lands on the ground, he doesn't go any further down. So what we'll do is this. Let me go back over here to the background. And so what I need to do is to insert into here a box collider. So what I'll do is click Add Component, Physics 2D, and then Box Collider. All right, now I can't see the box collider. Well, actually I can. It's right there. Perfect. Okay, so let's see here. What happens when I do this, when I hover my mouse pointer on top of the X? So you can see that the box collider, so I'm moving left and right, but keep your eyes over here. So I'm clicking, and you'll see that the box collider is getting bigger and bigger. All right, so let's make this thing as big as the entire scene. So let's see here, something like, okay, it looks like I'm spilling over a little bit, and that's okay. I'm going to make an adjustment in just a moment. Over here, where you see offset and X, I can move that to the left and to the right, and you see how that's having an offset. So I'm going to try to put that right in the middle, something like that. Over here where it says Y offset, well, that's simply moving it up and down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it right above where the ground surface is right there. So you'll see here that that's right where the ground surface is. Okay, that looks pretty good. All right, it doesn't have to be that wide, so let me go over here to Y and reduce that. I'm going to drag and move to the left. And right about there is good. Now, I could, if I wanted to, get the exact size by just simply measuring what, however the length is of this, but that's okay. I mean, it's not, I think just simply eyeballing it is good enough. So in fact, let me go ahead and take a look at this edge over here. And in terms of the size, I want to increase it. So it's just right there. That's good. And then I'm going to take a look at this edge. Okay, it looks like it's spilling over a little bit, so maybe what I'll do is I'll reduce the size. I can also use a numeric like this, 41. How about 40? No, how about 40.5? How about 40.6? That might be it right there, 40.6. So, whoops, what did I do? I'm at 40.6. 40.6. Nope, that's not it. 0.7? 0.8? Let's see what it looks like on the other side here. And let me select the background. And I need to move that over a little bit. So let's move it over just a tiny bit. It looks like it's not letting me move over enough here. So let me just type in some values. How about 0.4? No, 0.3? How about 0.35? Okay, that's pretty good. And now I'll take a look at the other edge, see what it looks like. It's not quite going all the way, so in terms of the size, how about if I said 41? And then I think I'll just move it over just a little bit, and then I think we'll be okay. And again, you'll have to play around with this in terms of the offset and these various values. So think if I did this, that's fine. And it looks like it's going all the way over the edge. And in fact, just a little bit over. That's fine. Yeah, I think we're okay. Okay, let's run the program. Go into game mode. He falls down. He's still falling down. Why? Well, he doesn't have any type of collider built into him, built into the character. So what we'll do is this. Now, I think what I'm going to do is I'll do one thing now, and then I'll change it later on, just so that you can learn from what happens if you add a particular type of collider. So, select the character. We're going to click on Add Component, Physics 2D, and you'll notice that we've used Box Collider, but if I keep on scrolling down, I have this guy over here that says Polygon Collider. Let me go ahead and select that. What a polygon collider does, let me zoom in, is it really takes a look at this image and completely covers him with a polygon collider. So notice that it's basically matching the outside edge. Can you see that green line over here? I mean, this is truly refined here in terms of providing a collider around him. And this can either be a good thing or a bad thing. Maybe I shouldn't say it's a bad thing, but there are consequences when using this type of collider. But let's discover that later on in the lesson. For right now, let me just click play and let's see what happens to him. So now he falls down, he lands on the ground because there's a collision that has taken place, and so he stays in place, and he's in the idle mode. Perfect. Okay, so this looks good. Let me just go ahead and save my work. So we'll say save project. All right, so that's good. Now what I'd like to do is I'd like to make it so that when I use the arrows that he is going to run to the left or to the right. So let's do this. Let's go back over here to animation, and again I'm going to make sure that the character is selected, and I'd like to create a different animation. I have idle already set, and I'd like to create a new clip, and for that new clip we're going to call that run. Now let me make sure that I place this into the animations. So let me go to assets, and here's animations. This is where I want to set the run animation. Click save. All right. Then I'm going to select the sprites run folder, and I'm going to select all these. So I'll click over here, hold shift, click over here to select all of them, and I'll just simply drag them into this animation time panel area. Okay, let's see what this looks like. Okay, that's too fast. That's way too fast. So let me stop, and let me go ahead and type in 30. Let's see what happens. Enter. Oops, sorry. Let me go back to the beginning for run, and let me type in 30 and press enter. Here we go. Well, it looks a little bit better, but maybe a little bit slower. So let me go back to the beginning and select 15 and press enter. And let's see what happens. Okay, that's better. I like that. And again, you can adjust it to however you want in terms of your animation speed by just simply changing the samples or changing the sample rate. I like this. That looks good. All right, so I might as well go ahead and finish up the other animations as well. We've got idle, we've got run. Let's go ahead and take care of jump next. So what we'll do is I'll click on this drop down. It says create a new clip, and that is going to be my jump clip. I'm already in the animations folder. Perfect. So I'll type in jump. And now I'll just simply take these images. So from 0, I'm going to go ahead and collapse these. From 0 to 9, I'm going to drag and drop them into this area. And let's see what it looks like here. So click jump. Okay, so that's just way too fast. Again, let me go back to the beginning here. And let's type in 15. Press enter. Let's see what that looks like. Now it doesn't look very exciting because he's not moving in a vertical, manner. But that's what it'll look like when he's in this jump animation. I think that's fine right there. 15 samples. So I'm going to go ahead and stop. Everything is looking good. Okay, so I've got idle, jump, run, and now let's go ahead and take care of slide. So I'll just simply click over here and create a new clip. And we're in the animations folder. Perfect. So we're going to call this slide. All right, let me select all of the images. So I'll select this, shift, select this bottom one, drag and drop. And there we go. And I can already tell you that's going to be, that's going to be too fast here. So what I'll do is I'll select 15, press enter, and then play, and let's see what that looks like. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, I can already tell there's going to be a problem. If I were to stop this, let's see if we go back over here to the idle state. So if I go to the idle state, you see where his feet are? Okay. Well, actually, let me just take him and move him down. So let me go back over here to the scene, select the character, and move him down to the ground right about there. Okay. So watch what happens when I go to the animation, and we're going to select slide, and I run the slide. Notice how he's above the ground. Well, that kind of looks cool that he's sliding above the ground, like on a cushion of air, but I don't want that. I'm going to want him to actually slide on the ground, but it just happens to be that this particular set of images, these images right here, were not set so that the image is right on the bottom. So I'm going to have to change that, and I'm going to have to use some sort of a graphical editor. Now, this is not a big deal, but it's just something to consider, especially if you're taking a look at the nuances of your program and how it's going to look. Okay, but let's not worry about that for right now. We'll talk about that at the end of the video lesson. Right now, we just want to get all of our animations done, and we are all set. All right, now that your animations are completed, you'll notice the Animator tab has these various items. And what we're going to do is we're going to organize them. And so when we organize them, we're going to have to take into consideration what is going to be happening first, second, third, so forth and so on. So you'll notice over here that since I created the idle animation first, which I did on purpose, that when I first enter the program, there is going to be a transition that goes directly into this idle state. And the idle state is just this guy right here. You'll see it in just a second. He's in this idle state. So notice when I'm into this, when I'm running the game mode, that you see the execution of those 10 slides, those 10 images, over and over and over again. That's what this bar represents. He is in the idle state, and it's just simply executing these over and over and over again. So what that means is that the entry is that when we first start the program, first start the game, you start the idle state. Okay. Well, so we are in the idle state. Let me move these guys out of the way just for a minute. You're in the idle state. What do you want to do if the user presses one of the arrow buttons to the left or to the right? Well, then you're going to want to go into a run state. So we want to go from here to here if the user presses one of the left or right arrow keys. All right. Well, if that's the case, what are we going to do? How are we going to transition from here to here? Well, first of all, let's do this. On top of the idle state, right-click, and you'll see a Make Transition. Click on this, and then where do you want to transition to? I want to transition to Run. Okay. And then, when the user is no longer running because the user lifts off of the left or right arrow, then we want to go back into the idle state. So I'm going to right-click on Run, so let me select that, right-click on it, Make Transition, and from here we're going to go right back to idle. Okay, so that is how I create the state that we are going to go into, remain in until something happens like the pressing down of an arrow key to the left or to the right. We make a transition from this state to this state, and then when the user is no longer pressing on any of the arrows, then we make a transition back from this state to this state. Now you'll notice that you have these arrows over here that indicate the transition and the direction of the transition. You'll also notice that we have these parameters. We can create parameters for our state, from one state to another. So let's do this. You'll notice the little plus symbol drop down, and it's saying that you can create a float, integer, boolean, or a trigger parameter. Now, what I want to do is I want to create several different parameters to indicate one for the speed. So what I'll do is I'll select float, and then the name of this one is going to be speed. And the reason why I'm creating a speed parameter is I want to know if this guy is moving and then stops, then I don't want to keep on sliding. I'm going to go ahead and stand up. Or if he's moving to the left or to the right, again, I want to know what direction he's moving. This would be positive direction. So if he's moving over here, it'd be, like say for example, +1 speed. If he's moving in this direction, it would be -1. So moving from right to left is negative. Moving from left to right is positive. And you'll see that in just a moment when we run the game. I want you to also create a trigger. I'm sorry, not a trigger, a Boolean. Because I want to know if he's on the ground. So I'm going to call this on ground. And that will just simply be a true or false switch that lets me know if he's on the ground. Because if he is, then I'm going to want to do something while he's on the ground. For example, if you're on the ground, you can jump. If you're in the air, you can't jump. I'm going to only allow you to jump if you're actually on the ground. Now I want to create some of these various trigger events. For example, let's click on the plus symbol, let's click on trigger, and we'll say init jump. Right? So this is going to be to trigger and initialize the jump animation. So we'll go into this jump animation. And then another one will be to init slide. Let me see here. And then we want to know if the character is actually sliding. So I should have created another Boolean. Create another Boolean here called is sliding. Okay. And let's see here. I can reposition these as well. So I think on my notes I have on ground, I have init jump, and then is sliding, and that's it. Yeah. Init slide, I should say, and then is sliding. Yeah, we're fine. Okay, so I have these parameters that I can use, especially over here when it comes to these various triggers or transitions from one state to another. So for example, in terms of idle going to run, let me select this arrow, and you notice over here it says list is empty in terms of the conditions. Let me go ahead and click this, and I'll select whatever I want, and these are the items that I have over here. I'm going to select speed. As long as the speed is greater than, and we're going to put 0.01. So when the speed is greater than this value, then you transition from idle to run. And then we want to transition back from run back to idle. Well, what are you going to do? How are you going to determine that? What parameter are you going to use? Well, over here where it says conditions, I'm going to click on this guy, and I'm going to say as long as the, I need speed here. As long as the speed is less than, and then over here I'm going to put 0.01. So now I have a way of transitioning from idle to run based on the speed. If the speed is greater than 0.0, transition to here and put him into this run animation. If the run speed is less than 0.0, so almost 0, 0.01 I should say, if it's almost 0 or less than 0.01, then we're going to transition back to the idle state. So he'll go from a running animation back to his idle state. Okay, great. So those are the various parameters, but nothing's going to happen until I get script going on. So let's do this. Let me go ahead and select the character, and then I need to generate a script for him. So we'll say add component, drag all the way to the bottom, new script. And for this new script, I'm going to say script character control. Enter. So script character control. Now let's actually go into the script so we can affect the character. So what I'll do is I'll right click and edit the script. And of course that's going to take me into MonoDevelop. And in MonoDevelop, this is where I'm going to actually be generating the code. Alright, so let's go ahead and move over here to the top of the program. And there are going to be various items that I want you to include. So the first one is going to be a public item. It's a float called move speed. So I need to know and keep track of what the speed is. Now here's how it's going to work out. Instead of having him ramp up and ramp down as he moves to the left and to the right, by the way, let me just take this and move it to my other screen so that I can just simply slide over here and slide back over here. So instead of having our character ramp up to a certain speed, as soon as he is moving, as soon as the user presses the left or the right arrow, he is immediately going to be moving at 5. Okay. So if you want to change this value, that's fine. We're making it public, so then you'll see it over here on the bottom in just a moment here. You'll see it as one of the values that you can change. We're going to start off with 5. Now, when I push on the space bar, I want there to be a certain force applied to our character. So what we'll do is we'll call this jump force. And we'll set it equal to 70. Now, why did I create 70? Well, prior to this video lesson, I was doing a bunch of experimenting to figure out what would be the best value. So I'm gonna put it at 70 right now, but of course, by trial and error, you can change that to whatever value you want. Okay, now I'm going to type these following line items, but I'm not going to really talk about them a whole lot right now, but we'll talk about them later. I just want you to put them down for right now. So we'll say public transform, and we're going to just call this ground check. Now in terms of a comment, this is where the ground should be for the character. And again, I'll describe what this is a little bit later on. Let's also type in public layer mask. What is ground? This tells the character what ground is. So is the water the ground? Is the air the ground? Are the bullets ground? So forth and so on. So this is basically used to stop animating a falling animation. And again, we'll talk about this in just a moment. Okay, now let's create a Boolean called isGrounded. Is the character grounded? At first, we'll say false. We're going to create another Boolean, isSliding. Again, I want to know, is our character sliding? And at first, we'll say false. Now, I'd like to create some private members. And so the first one is a Boolean, is facing right. Are you facing to the right? Well, when we first start off the game, yeah, you're facing to the right. As you can see here, you're facing right. But if the user presses the left arrow, then I'm going to want to take you and face you to the left. How do we do that? And I'll show you that in just a moment. But first I need to know what direction you're facing. Then I'll know how to orient you facing left or facing right. Okay, we're going to create another private float variable called vertical speed. And this is just simply telling me how fast you're moving up or down. Let's create another private float called ground radius. We're going to set that to 0.2. How big is the circle going to be when we check for the ground? Now this is one of those things that I'm going to talk about a little bit later on, but I'll just give you a preview. What I'm going to do is this. When the character jumps up, and just before he lands on the ground, how do I know that he's landed on the ground? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place a little tiny circle right here, a little tiny collider, so that when he actually strikes the ground, then we're going to get a recognition that he's actually struck the ground, and that's what this thing is all about. Right? I want to make sure that he's actually struck the ground, so I better create a little tiny radius underneath the feet so that I know when he has actually struck the ground. Again, we'll talk more about this in just a moment. All right, and then private rigid body 2D, and we'll call it RB2D. So what the rigid body is, first of all, let me just make sure I'm looking at my notes. 1, 2, 3, 4 private members. 1, 2, 3, 4 private members. Yep, perfect. I'm all set. What the rigid body is this. Now remember, this script, let me save it by the way, this script is tied to this character. So this character has a rigid body, 2D component to it. I want to refer to that rigid body 2D component, and so this is what I'm going to do. For the character that this script is associated with, I'm going to get that rigid body in a moment, and I'm going to assign it to this, so that in essence this rigid, this RB2D is really going to be associated with this character's rigid body 2D information. So that's what I create. All right, I'm also going to need to know or create a reference to the animator. So we'll say animator. We'll just call it anim. And eventually what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to say, hey, this guy right here, I want that to be tied to this area right here, the animator. So that if the animator is in idle or run or slide or in jump state, I want to be able to control that. So how do I create a reference to that? Right here. I create the anim variable that is of type animator. Okay, that's good. So let's go into start. So what we'll do is we'll say RB2D, that's that rigid body. I'm going to use get component. So get component, and then the angled brackets and rigid body 2D, and then open and close parentheses. So what this does is at the start of the program, get the rigid body. Well, remember, we're going to get the rigid body for the character that's associated with the script, and so for this character, that's going to be this guy right here, the rigid body 2D. So we're going to create a reference to it in our code, and that's going to be this. And then I need to do the same thing for the anim. The anim is going to be associated with this animator. So over here, we'll say anim. Again, get component, animator. And then open and close parentheses. So anytime you're using get component, what you're really doing is you're saying, in the code, make a reference to the actual item that I'm referring to here in this game area. Well, in this case, I'm referring to the character's rigid body 2D. So this is the character's rigid body 2D. And then over here, I'm going to refer to the character's anim. So see, if I click on the camera, say for example, then the animator doesn't necessarily refer to that. It's just the character that has all these animations here, such as jump, run, idle, slide, so forth and so on. So the character's animator is what I am going to be calling anim. All right. Okay, well, since we're dealing with physics, then what I'm going to need to do is change this from update to fixed update. And what happens is fixed update, as you'll recall from other video lessons, is just a method or a function that is called, and specifically when you're dealing with physics content, then you want to use this as opposed to the update frame. Nothing wrong with using the update frame, it's just this is what Unity recommends when you're dealing with physics. Okay, so the first thing that I want to do is, there's some code that I could type here, and I'm going to be typing some code later on here on the top, but let's just deal with the character moving. So we'll say moving the character left and right, or I should say left or right. That's what we want to deal with right here. All right, so the character is going to move either to the left or to the right based on some conditions. So I'll say if, and let's see if one of those arrows, either the left or right hand arrow, is being pressed. So if the input get axis raw, what is this? Let's see here. So what is get axis? Okay, returns the value of the virtual axis identified by axis name. Returns the value of virtual axis identified with no smoothing filtering applied. So in other words, what this means is when I press down on the arrow, it's not going to go from 0, 0.1, 0.2, 0.3, 0.4. It's just going to go straight from 0 to 1 or from 1 to 0. So what I'm going to do over here is I'm going to say if any of those horizontal, make sure this is spelled correctly, if any of those horizontal keys are pressed, specifically if this is greater than 0f, and this is just simply meaning, the f just simply means that this is a floating point value. Open and close curly braces. So if I pressed a left or a right arrow, and so that value is greater than 0, right? Because we're just simply pressing it down, so it's, and I'll show you in just a moment here, it's going to look like it's just, boom, going from 0 to 1 when I press down on that arrow key. If that's the case, well then I want to affect the velocity of my rigid body. So what we'll do is we'll say RB2D dot velocity. Right? So this is one of the components of my rigid body. And what do I want to do? I want to say new vector. Now, specifically vector 2, which means I have to add two components. Now, the two components that I've got have to be an x-axis and a y-axis. So what I'll do is I'll just simply say, okay, in terms of the x-axis, let's use move speed. That's the variable that we created up here, which is really 5. Okay, so move speed in terms of the x-axis, and in terms of the y-axis, so we'll say RB2D dot velocity dot y. So whatever that y-axis happens to be. Now, and the reason why I did this is because I could be jumping, but I want to be able to jump and move to the left or to the right, regardless of what height or what the y velocity is. So that's why I did it this way. Okay. Now the next thing that we're going to have to say is, okay, so if you are moving to the left or to the right, then we're going to want to know what that speed is of your character that's moving to the left or to the right. So we'll say anim dot set float speed, close parentheses or close quote, because that's the property that I'm referring to. You see how this one is of type float? And so that's why we said this over here. For the anim dot float, for the animation dot set float, specifically the speed parameter, what you're going to do is you're going to set that to whatever the speed is of the rigid body. So RB2D dot velocity dot x-axis. Whatever this velocity is, right? We're moving this thing. Well, whatever speed that happens to be, I want you to set the float value for speed, which means change this guy to whatever the speed is, okay, by doing this. Okay, now notice what I did. I said, okay, so if the speed is greater than 0, or I'm sorry, if the get axis raw horizontal is greater than 0, then you're going to do this. But we also need to consider this. Let's type in else if input, dot get axis raw. Once again, the horizontal spelling is important. And then close parens, less than 0f. Open and close curly braces. Okay, so see, if I'm moving in one direction, then I am moving in the positive direction. If I'm moving in another direction, I'm moving in the negative direction. So if I hit the right arrow key, my character is going to move in this direction, and so I am said to be moving in the positive direction. Let me see here, let me select the character. If I'm moving in this direction, I am moving from 0 to the positive direction. In fact, keep your eyes over here, and you can see that I'm moving in the positive x direction. Now, if I'm moving this way, then I'm moving in the negative x direction. And so that's what this code is all about, right? If I'm moving in the positive direction or if I'm moving in the negative direction. So I have to take into account either of those. So we'll say RB2D dot velocity. And I'm going to set that to a new vector 2. Now, in terms of move speed, I'll say negative move speed because I'm moving in the negative direction. And then in terms of the y-axis component, I'll say RB2D dot velocity dot y. Whatever my y-axis velocity happens to be, we're just going to maintain that. Really, the big deal is this guy over here. If I'm using the arrow left key, then we're going to move speed in the left direction or in the right direction. That's what this is all about. Well, then, of course, I have to make sure to set the animation. So we'll just say anim dot set float speed. Now I'm going to use the math dot absolute value, ABS. And as you recall, absolute value just simply means take all negative numbers and turn them into positive. Positive numbers will stay positive. Well, whatever this value happens to be for RB2D dot velocity, whether we're moving in the x-axis positive or negative direction, I don't care about that. I just want to know the actual velocity amount. So if this is negative or positive, I'm just going to take the absolute value of it and set that to the speed property, which I'll go back over here to animator. It's going to set this to a positive value. Okay. All right, finally, I'm going to have an else statement. Open and close, curly braces. And then I'm going to type in RB2D dot velocity. We're going to set that to a new vector 2, because we're dealing with 2D space. In terms of the x-axis, we'll say 0f, and then RB2D dot velocity dot y. In other words, whatever the y velocity is, we're just simply going to maintain that. And then, of course, I want to update. So I'll say anim dot set float, and specifically it's the speed parameter that I'm going to be referring to, right? This speed parameter, and RB2D dot velocity dot x. Okay, so if I'm moving the arrow to the right or to the left, then obviously we're going to move the character. Now, if none of those are moving, then I want my character to be still in terms of the x-axis. Now, I may have jumped, and so it'll just, if I jumped, that's this part over here, but in terms of the x-axis, the character is just going to simply jump up and come right back down. There is no x-axis movement. Why? Because I don't have either the left or the right hand arrow being pressed. So that means that all I have left is just potentially y-axis movement, because there is no x-axis movement. And then I'm just simply going to report that back to this speed parameter, which is this guy over here, so it should show me a number. Okay. All right, so let's save our work. And let's see what happens. Let's go back over here and enter into our game mode. Okay, so here he is. He's, oh, whoops, we have a problem here. Oh, I know what happened. Let me go back over here, and let me see. I have this thing over here called ground check, and what is ground? And I haven't set any of those things. So I think what I'm going to do is, because I'm not really interested in talking about that stuff yet. So let me just comment this out and comment this out, because we'll talk about those items later. And again, let me save. So file save, or Command S or Control S over on Windows, and go back over here and let's see what happens. So running, and so here he is in the idle state. Good. Let me hit the right arrow. Perfect. Let me lift up the right arrow. Boom. Oh, okay, so it took a little bit of time for him to stop. We'll talk about that in just a moment. Let me hit the left arrow. Oh my, look at that. That looks that looks funny. Okay, so first of all, let's stop the program. We got to take care of, there's a couple things we got to take care of. The first thing is he's toppling over. And we can't have him doing that, right? That's ridiculous. We're not going to sell any games like that. So let me select character. And let's see here. I always have a hard time finding this. Is it in points? Is it in... No, it's not in info, I don't think. No. Let's see here. Is it rigid body? There it is. It has to do with the rigid body. And then if I go to constraints, I'm going to freeze the z-axis rotation. And so what this prevents is the character from toppling to the left or to the right. It freezes the y rotation, so he's or the z rotation rather. So he's always going to be upright like this. So now let's see what happens when I go back into the game mode. Okay, that looks good, and then we go backwards. All right, as you see, he's not toppling over. But if I took this off, right, and went back into game mode, okay, so we're running, and then I'm going to go backwards, and there he goes. That's pretty funny. All right, so yeah, we want to freeze the rotation. Now, first of all, you'll notice that we are, in fact, moving from left to right. That's great. We are moving from right to left, but of course the orientation is not correct. We want the orientation so that he is pointing from right to left. You'll also notice how the states change depending on my arrow presses. So right now we're in the idle state. I'm going to press and hold down right, and what you'll see is you'll see like a shot over here to the run. See that? And then I'm going to lift up. So it's allowed to finish this run animation. And then if I click on the left mouse or left arrow and then I lift up, then we're going to shoot over here to the idle state. Okay. Now you'll notice that there's a little bit of time from when I lift off the arrow key. So I'm going to say the word lift when I'm lifting off the arrow key. And you'll see that the animation still goes on just for a moment. Watch this. So I'm pressing down, lift. Did you see or did you hear and then see how he still goes on for a little bit? Let me do it again. So down, lift. See, he goes on for a little bit. Now, in a 3D game, that may be okay in terms of a character kind of like ramping down, right, from a run state to, slowing down, just as if you were in a 100-meter dash. You would run really quickly, and then you wouldn't just simply come to a quick stop. You would ramp down. So in a 2D game, that's okay. In a 3D game, rather. But in a 2D game, we want this character to come to an abrupt stop. So how do you make that happen? All right, so the way that we're going to make that happen is we're going to go over here to these transitions. And for this particular transition, here's what I want you to do. Select the transition and click on this settings option. And you'll see over here that you have has exit time. We don't want has exit time. But before I take that away, I better change this to another value. So we'll change this to 0.001, say for example. And I'm going to show you why you're going to do that. We're going to take off has exit time. We're going to take off fixed duration. We're going to change this to 0, and everything else is okay. All right. So over here, for this transition, when we go from run to idle, same deal. So let's just go ahead and take this guy. We'll change that to 0.001. Take off the exit time, no fixed duration, no transition duration. Change that to 0. And that looks good. Now let's see what happens. Let me save my work first. Save project. And let's see what happens when I enter into game mode. Okay, so I'm going to say lift again when I lift up the arrow button. So I'm holding it down, 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 lift, down, 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 lift. Did you see how the character comes to an abrupt stop? So down, 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 lift, down, 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 lift. Perfect. So the character is immediately responding to the pressing down and the lifting off of the arrow keys and comes to an abrupt stop.